Welcome to the Let's Talk Energy podcast from EnergyNet. This series was recorded at the Africa Energy Forum 2024 in Barcelona, Spain. Join us for these and other episodes as we talk to the industry players, stakeholders, and rising stars of Africa's energy sector.
Hey, good afternoon. I'm Andy Herscowitz. I'm the Executive Director of ODI Global in Washington, D.C. I'm really excited to be here today with Joe Anise from GE, Vernova, and we're going to talk a little bit about sharing some of our reflections on the first day of EnergyNet's Africa Energy Forum here in Barcelona. Joe?
It's great to be here with you, Andy. Thanks a lot for having me, and excited to have a discussion today.
Great. So Joe, one of the things I wanted to talk about, and we had some of this discussion this morning, is when we think through the energy transition, particularly as it relates to Africa, what are some of the challenges that you're seeing?
I would say the first thing is we need to focus on is making sure that there's energy security, making sure that there's affordable, reliable, and sustainable energy available before we can get to, let's say, the full transition in the long term. So, I think in today's, we didn't talk about some of the numbers earlier today, but I think a lot of people know this. The average household in Africa is consuming less than 500 kilowatt hours. The global average is over 3,000, right? We talked this morning that there are over 600 million that still don't have reliable, affordable power. So before we can talk about the transition, I think we need to address those areas.
So how do you get to energy security? When you talk about energy security, there's a lot of ways to view that. Is it talking about that each individual country provides for its own energy security? Or are you talking about energy security at the household level? What do you mean by energy security?
So usually it's at the country level, but I think there's an opportunity to also address that geographically as well. But yes, you have to look at what are the resources available in the country or that you have access to, and be able to utilize that. Yeah. And I think that does require, in certain cases, bringing those countries together in certain examples, right?
Yeah, because that's one of the things people think through when you talk about energy security. A lot of people interpret that meaning that each country needs to be able to provide its own power for itself.
Right.
And that doesn't necessarily work well for countries that don't have, if you're talking about a transition, for example, they may have plenty of sun for solar and plenty of wind for wind power, but they might not have access to hydropower or
nuclear,
geothermal or
right,
nuclear that provides baseload power. So energy security, does that also mean power trading across borders, or how do you see that?
Absolutely. I mean, I think at the country level, they need to be able to address how they're going to secure energy for their population, ensure that there is affordable and reliable, sustainable. And that could be through the means that we talked about, or whether it's the resources available or through trading arrangements. Many parts of the world, you have interconnections between countries that allow for that. We see that in the Middle East, for example, where a lot of the countries are interconnected. And, there's been a lot of talk, obviously, about interconnections between North Africa and Europe, for example, because the time zones are different, and they will allow for different times of the year for different peaks that will allow for that power. So I think you very much need to address that before you get into what does the transition mean? How do we decarbonize? Because the technologies are available. Even within existing technologies today, you could be addressing how to decarbonize.
So I want to move to talking a little bit more about opportunities. So, and specifically some of the solutions that GE Vernova can provide as well. When we talk about energy security, what does that look like in terms of trying to operationalize it? What are the methods, the tools that you're using to achieve that energy security?
So I think, look, if you talk about that in the journey of a transition, and today it was interesting because a lot of the discussion was around renewables, right? The more renewables that are being added into a grid, the more you have to figure out how to stabilize that grid. Gas, we believe, is a great source of energy that can be utilized to stabilize. It also is very resilient and, quick response time. So in many situations, you're using gas power as that tool towards your energy transition. Of course, if you have access to hydro or if you have access to nuclear, we have the technology within GE Vernova to address all of those, as well as wind. So it's really
geothermal as well.
We do, yeah.
Okay.
So it really depends on what are the resources available and how do we solve for that. But in the short term, I would say you could also be looking at existing technologies today, and we've done this in Africa. We have a fleet of gas turbines that are in Africa that could be upgraded, for example. We did this in Nigeria recently, where 3 gas turbines were upgraded. Additional power using the same amount of fuel. So that is the first thing that could be done. The second is you could look at the fleet. In many cases, they're operating in open cycle. So we can convert that fleet into combined cycle. Basically increase 50% more power utilizing the same amount of fuel. Obviously, long-term, there are other solutions, right? Looking at, we talked a little bit about hydrogen earlier. Carbon capture is an option.
GE Vernova has carbon capture technologies.
So we actually just announced a project in the UK. It's the largest combined cycle project with the highest efficient gas turbine, as well as exhaust gas recirculation. So when you're doing carbon capture, you lose a little bit of the efficiency. You gain that through exhaust gas recirculation. And that's in the Net Zero Teesside project with BP.
So let's talk about traditional technologies, and I can ask you these questions. I know you've been with the GE family for a very, very long time, so you'll have a technical response that I probably wouldn't understand. When you look at all the different types of baseload power that are available in Africa, you've got the geothermal, you've got hydropower, there's gas, and South Africa's got nuclear. Is all baseload equal in terms of, is there any type of baseload power that's more flexible, that's easier? Are there pros and cons of different baseload types of energy that you think would favor any particular type over one or the other, or is it just important that you have baseload? Is it not highly distinguishable?
I think you have to, what I said earlier in terms of you have to be able to meet the demand with the resources that best suit and available for the situation. So that is your primary goal and objective, is how do you meet that baseload?
Right.
Of course, if you have the ability to diversify, you absolutely should.
Right.
And you should be able to do that, with all the existing technologies that are available, that make sense.
Right.
So we do work with our customers to be able to diversify when they have the ability to do so. But you absolutely have to make sure that you're meeting your base load.
Yeah. Now let's turn to governments also, the African governments themselves. We've seen very few IPPs move forward over the last few years in Africa, very few new power generation projects move forward. And there's a lot of blame to go around to everyone, and it's also not everybody's fault. But what do you see as the role of governments, particularly the African governments, in trying to move the needle in increasing power generation and energy access in Africa?
I think it's a combination of everyone coming together. So, it's important that the industry, financing community, as well as governments are all working hand in hand to solve the problem. I don't think one entity can solve it on its own. But when it comes to what can the governments do, I think the biggest opportunity and role that they can play is to develop policies that will incentivize for the industry to be able to meet the needs. They also need to be putting a clear strategy forward in terms of what are the demands and what are the timelines that they have in place to be able to incentivize. I think the duration that we talked about today earlier in the morning is too long, right? If an average project is going to take 6 to 7 years, that's a long time for us to be able to achieve what we need to. And I think we need to have policies in place that are going to shorten that duration and incentivize to get those projects done.
Great. What about the financial institutions? We're talking about the World Bank, the multilateral development banks, the development finance institutions, private banks. What roles do they need to play in helping accelerate the energy transition in Africa?
I think it's the most important thing is that everyone needs to understand the roles that different technologies can play in this transition. Unfortunately, many have assumed that because there are clear decarbonization targets, that excludes certain technologies. And I think technologies have a role to play. And I think, we've talked about gas having that, playing a role as part of the transition, but also can be a destination solution as well, because ultimately those plants can burn a carbon-free fuel in the future. So you have to think about the duration of the project, as well as achieving that transition and enabling the financing to support that. And I think that'll be the biggest area that could benefit and impact projects.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit, because I remember when we first launched Power Africa, GE had these combined cycle and plants, and we were excited about, they're going to start off on HFO, then they're convert to gas. This is a different era. We're happy about that. Like, it's better than HFO. We're going to do gas, and no problem. The first 4,000 megawatts of projects that Power Africa supported were all gas projects, and nobody batted an eye. We're in a different era now. Now it's all right. How are you going to switch that gas to clean hydrogen at some point in the future?
Yeah.
Where is GE Vernova right now in terms of whether it's pilot projects or existing operational assets where they've made the transition or demonstrating, the technologies that you have that they can be used, in fact, for hydrogen as a whole ecosystem, including the pipeline that feeds it, as opposed to thinking through just hypothetically it will happen.
Right. So,
and I hope you've got a good answer for that, and I'm not putting you on the spot.
No, not at all.
Okay.
So actually, GE Vernova has over 120 gas turbines around the globe operating on some percentage of hydrogen.
Okay.
And anywhere from a 5% blend all the way up to 100%.
So your turbines are designed to be able to handle hydrogen without any issue.
Correct.
Okay.
And we have over 8.5 million hours of operating hours operating on some level of hydrogen.
Where is that? Where in the world?
It's dispersed all over the world.
Anything in Africa, though?
So actually, during COP27, we did a pilot demonstration in Egypt. Since COP27 was being held there. We took I think it was an LM6000. So it's a small aeroderivative gas turbine that we blended 5% hydrogen into that as a demonstration to show that you can actually take an existing asset and convert it. I think where we have to focus on, so by 2030, we believe that we'll have all of our gas turbine frames suitable to be able to burn 100% hydrogen.
Okay.
The challenge is going to really be, can we get the infrastructure in the industry to supply that amount of hydrogen? It's a massive amount that'll be needed.
And do you have the energy necessary to produce the hydrogen that?
Correct.
Because making hydrogen requires energy itself.
It does. Yeah. But I think there are different models, obviously, where if you can utilize green hydrogen when the demand isn't there. I think there are obviously opportunities to do that, but I think as an equipment provider, we want to be able to make sure that we have our equipment ready and suitable for a carbon-free fuel in the future. So when I talked about earlier having a destination for that technology, that's why we believe that gas will play a critical role in that conversion, but then ultimately in the end solution as well.
Great. All right, well, we're wrapping up a really fascinating day. I mean, this is the first day of the Africa Energy Forum here in Barcelona. I know you probably had a lot of meetings. We had a great roundtable with business this morning. I was hoping maybe you could share some of your reflections and key takeaways from today.
Look, I think it's, bringing together the industry as we are here, coming together with government, with the finance community, with policymakers, and with the private sector is what we need to do. I think the sense of urgency is clearly there, and I think that's something that I feel. And I'm hoping that the conversations that we have throughout the rest of the week will result in some action.
Great. Well, thank you so much. It was really great catching up with you.
Likewise.
This series was recorded at the Africa Energy Forum 2024 in Barcelona, Spain. Join us for these and other episodes as we talk to the industry players, stakeholders, and rising stars of Africa's energy sector.